Start now. Welcome to those of you who have joined us so far. I am an executive board member at StolenYouth, and my name is Susan Long-Walsh. This webinar is covering the dangerous world of sugaring because there is nothing sweet about it. I have been a board member at StolenYouth for over 4 years. And I can tell you the things that I have learned and that we continue to reach out and educate others about is critical for our youth of today. The only thing I knew about sugaring was that it was a hair removal, to be perfectly honest with you. Being a part of StolenYouth and raising my awareness on this and how important and critical it is for us as parents, as activists, as community members, we must continue to educate each other. And so I would like to introduce to you our incredible panel of experts that are going to be a part of our hour together to raise our action, our education, and what we do moving forward today and tomorrow. They will introduce themselves and give you a little bit about themselves. And so we will start with Megan. Thank you, Megan, and welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Lundstrom. I am the co-founder and director of research at the Avery Center. We are a nonprofit based in Northern Colorado, and we serve victims and survivors of commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking across the country. I got into this work because I am a survivor of commercial sexual exploitation and domestic pimp-controlled sex trafficking myself, and have been in this field for the last 7 or 8 years now, and really found my lane in research. And that sounds very nerdy, but ultimately it is listening to the voices of those who hold lived experience and making sure that our voices are centered in this field. And I'll be sharing a little bit of some of those voices with you all today. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Megan. Ben, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Gauen. I am a senior deputy prosecuting attorney for the King County Prosecutor's Office, and here in my office in downtown Seattle. My role at the prosecutor's office is focuses exclusively on prosecuting cases involving sex trafficking and the commercial sexual exploitation of adults and minors. I have a full caseload. I'm also actively involved in our office's policy work. And one of the very cool things about my position is I get to do just this and work with community to bring education and awareness to an important topic, and work with community partners in an upstream intervention way that doesn't necessarily rely on somebody appearing in a courtroom, whether they're a victim or an offender. And I'm honored to also be a board member for StolenYouth. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for being a part of this. And Rob, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, but I would also like to congratulate you on being one of the 50 rising stars of Madison Avenue who are revolutionizing advertising, and particularly with your focus on sugaring.
Well, Susan, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Hi, everyone, and thank you, StolenYouth, for having me. This is such an incredibly profoundly worthwhile group of people who are actually making deep impact in their lives, and I feel very honored to be among this panel. My name is Rob Scherzer. I work in advertising. I lead the data and creative innovation department of DNA Seattle, which is an independent advertising agency, and I am here because my team noticed a swell in conversations around sugaring, especially when it came to one of our clients. And we work really hard to drive deep impact with our campaigns. And we found an opportunity to use technology to kind of target moments online that are where sugaring is happening, and then educate and empower people to make decisions based on some information they may not have had. And I'll go into the details of that later, but part of my journey has been around giving a voice to the the kind of underprivileged audiences in our world. And I am super proud of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Rob. And to all of the folks who have joined us today, please put your questions in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. And so for right now, I'd love to start with the questions with our esteemed panel. Megan, I'm going to start with you. Can you please tell those of us who don't know what sugaring is, what is it? Why should we be talking about it?
Sure. So I think a very simple definition of sugaring is just a transactional dating or intimate relationship where one partner is financially supporting the other. In practice, what essentially happens is one person has money and wants sex, and another person needs money and is in a position where selling sex is the option that they have available to them. And so when you actually look at what's happening in a sugaring situation for most sugaring relationships, it is essentially prostitution. But it's in this pretty package, right? So it's got this pretty language to it. It's marketed very beautifully and glamorous with the idea of you can have, the latest handbag or shoes or trips or a luxury apartment. So it really sells this ideal. And the reality is very different from what's marketed for the most part.
Megan, who's being targeted?
So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so when we're thinking about who's being targeted, these are some billboards, and each of these really is targeting a different specific demographic of individuals. So an individual who is undocumented, an individual who is lower income and receiving perhaps Medicaid or other government assistance, or even an individual that is currently in prostitution and looking for slightly different options. Ultimately, marginalized identities are disproportionately impacted by this issue. So if we want to go to the next slide, I can talk very briefly about a study that the Avery Center did looking at seeking arrangements to better understand race and gender, and how that shows up in the sugaring world. So what we did is we looked at 4 cities across the United States, big kind of metro area cities that have a lot of activity, a lot of relative diversity. And then we pulled 30 accounts from sugar daddies and 30 accounts from sugar babies in each of those 4 cities. So we had a total of 240 accounts that we looked at for this study. When we look at the sugar daddies, there were also sugar mommies, but you can see that overwhelmingly, the individual that has the money that's in the position of power is a man. When you look at the sugar babies, it's the exact opposite. So it's overwhelmingly young women and potentially girls. If we can go to the next slide. When we look at race, again, we're going to see the sugar daddy, the person with the power, is for the most part a white male, and the sugar babies are disproportionately women of color. And that's really concerning when we start to unpack those power dynamics that play in these situations. But this makes sense within the context of these billboards of if this is who that they're marketing to, that's what we're seeing on this website.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing in those racial dynamics. And, specifically, what they're doing is they're targeting the financially and the emotionally vulnerable populations, mm-hmm. and our young women. So who are these people that are getting into the sugaring relationships, and how do they go about getting into the sugaring relationships?
So if we could go put the slides back up and go just to the first couple of slides. I really enjoy, like I said, centering the voices of those who have been there. So when we look at who sugar daddies are, one of my favorite places and I use the term favorite within context because this work is not for the faint of heart. For those of you that are maybe just learning about this issue, starting to learn about commercial sexual exploitation and commercial sex buyers, sex buyers sometimes refer to themselves as hobbyists, but they also have these discussion forums or review boards. So just like thinking about like a Yelp review for a restaurant, sex buyers have websites that they can go to and review their purchases, for lack of a better term. And so these review boards, one of the questions I get asked all the time is like, is this on the dark web? Nope, it's not. It's just on the internet. You can go. Some of them have, you have to sign up with an email address. Some are just publicly viewable. But this is always a place that we go at the Avery Center when we're really wanting to hear specifically from commercial sex buyers about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what's changing at any given time. And so these are just two quotes when we did a keyword search on one of these buyer review forums for sugar babies. And you can see here that commercial sex buyers who are purchasing individuals that are in prostitution, there's discussion threads about sugaring and discussions around, is it different from prostitution? And ultimately, you can see that sex buyers do not see any difference between a person in prostitution and a person who is engaging in sugaring. And so when we think about sex buyers, I think it's really important to understand that it's not a different demographic that's on a sugar daddy website than is paying for sex from somebody that is in just outright prostitution. And as a survivor, this is something that I can support anecdotally too. So we see this in the data, but I can also bring some kind of personalize that. So I was actually groomed through sugaring. My trafficker encouraged me to first start trying sugar dating as a means of getting into the commercial sex trade and violating those boundaries slowly over time. In interacting with sugar daddies, I actually met a man who told me about these review boards and encouraged me to move from sugaring into prostitution because he said, you know, you're going to make more money. You're not going to be dependent on just a few sugar daddies that have a ton of control over you. And so you're, as somebody that's sugaring, you're potentially experiencing that grooming from the commercial sex buyer, but also potentially a trafficker that's presenting as an intimate partner during that time as well. So on the next slide is another quote, and this one is from an individual. We call her Layla. We've changed her name for these presentations, but the Avery Center has partnered with the University of Northern Colorado, and we have conducted to date over 75 qualitative interviews with women, both currently in prostitution and exited from it. And Layla's quote here, she kind of just talked briefly about sugaring and that it really ultimately was not different, and that is a misconception from the outside looking in, that somehow sugaring is different than prostitution. But she shared through her story similarly. So getting into the commercial sex trade through sugaring, and then at a certain point when she was ready to exit, needing to use sugaring as a means to exit just high volume commercial sexual exploitation. But she also really talked about how dangerous sugar daddies are for many reasons. So they have a lot of control over the individual because the sugar baby is financially dependent upon that sugar daddy. And so the fear of losing those funds can make somebody do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. But she also talked about, you know, you have to, oftentimes if a sugar daddy is going to buy a plane ticket for you, you have to give them your real name. And there's also this guise of this is a relationship. And so this complete stranger is showing up at your house, at your home address, to take you out on a date. They're picking you up, they're coming into your home, and you don't necessarily know who they are or what their actual motives might be. On the next slide is, I think, one more quote from who's a part of this. And this is kind of a more in-depth quote. But again, just driving this fact home that we don't know who is on the other side of this. We don't know who this sugar daddy is, and how harmful ultimately this can be. And this is, again, out of the mouths of commercial sex buyers who have engaged in these practices. And so they're saying this. So we're going to say it today, but this is not new. This is something that those engaged in it are very aware of, the power dynamics and how to utilize those to leverage things. So even if sex is not involved, there's emotional manipulation and oversharing and violation of boundaries. And all of those things are also incredibly harmful to somebody who is already vulnerable.
Well, Megan, as you know, we live in a culture of spending. And on college campuses, there's that economic disparity. You want to be able to have a college life and a social life. So what makes the college campuses such a hotspot for sugar relationships?
Oh, so many things. And I know Ben will touch on a little bit too here in a bit, but because we have our partnership with the University of Northern Colorado, I've had the honor of, we've had so many university interns and done a lot of partnering with Greek life here locally. And one of the things that I learned was in talking with some of our interns was, particularly in sororities, the underclassmen are taught by the upperclassmen in the sororities, like this is how you can like be a college student, but you can still go on dates, you can go on trips, you can have, the nice clothing. And so there is a culture of grooming that is happening on college campuses, which is terrifying for so many reasons. And right now, what we're seeing, particularly with the pandemic, so we're in a relatively rural area here, but the sugaring websites in the area exploded with new sugar babies at the beginning of the pandemic. And so that just speaks to the economic vulnerability that the COVID-19 pandemic has just exacerbated. It was always there. It's just exacerbated now, but you have all of these college students that are economically vulnerable. When you think about vulnerable populations for commercial sexual exploitation, we think about people who are not connected with perhaps their family of origin or a really strong social support system. And that's college students that are moving away. They're moving across country. They're maybe not living with their family anymore. But also that time of life and that age is a time for defining who you are as a person and trying new things and experimenting and being challenged with new ideas. And so that environment, while it can be such a place of growth and development as a person, is also can be so horrifically exploited in situations like this, where it seems like this is just a new and exciting idea to try out, not understanding the harms that could come from it.
Well, because they think, I'm navigating on my terms. It's not with a pimp.
Yep.
It's empowering for me,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my choice.
Yep.
But, young people will have to change this culture.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's essential for us to create space and educate people, but it's essential for them to create the space for them to learn more about these issues. So how do we go about talking to each other about this, talking to our teenagers, talking to our college students and our young aged adults about the seriousness of this, that sugaring is prostitution?
Yeah. Oh man, so many things, but I want to definitely respect everybody's time here. I am a parent myself. I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and then I have a 6-year-old. And my 2 older kids lived with me during my trafficking experience. And so the conversations that we have in my house are, they're very real. My kids lived through trafficking with me. They are survivors in their own way, and they're navigating the fallout and the trauma from witnessing the things that they did during that time. I think what is really neat and special now is that we're able to have incredibly open conversations around relationships and trust and healthy boundaries and what is out there. My kids have cell phones and computers, and I do my best as a parent to monitor those devices, which I think is a component of it. But more importantly, I want my kids to feel safe coming to me, because they're going to do things. They're going to make a guess of what they need to do, or they want to try something and they're going to mess up. And I don't ever want them to feel that I expect them to be perfect, or that they should be ashamed of something that they've done. I want them to feel safe coming to me and saying, like, I messed up, I need help. That's the most important thing. And that requires creating just an environment of trust and open dialogue in our home. So I think that's really important, particularly with younger kids, is having those conversations at age appropriate times about what's out there. I also think from kind of an action point, and happy to go into this further, but universities have a role to play in this too. And Ben will kind of talk about the EDU email addresses. I think that's a huge piece. And there's ways for people to get involved, both with their friends and their kiddos, but also at that systems change level too.
Thank you, Megan. And that's a great segue for you, Ben. If you could please just start to share with us the depth of what you do and what you know and what you've seen.
Sure, thank you. And Megan, thank you so much for sharing with us all about your lived experiences. I know that's never super easy to do, and we appreciate it. We're grateful for it. I think my sort of window into this sugaring construct developed about 2 years ago, and it developed through casework where through police investigations, we were seeing sugaring actually harm young people. I have a case right now that involves a 14-year-old little girl, where she was on a sugaring website. The factual predicate here, I think, is based on the idea that sugaring is an incredible easy thing to get into. The websites that market this construct are as easy to access as a dating website, and they operate as easy as a dating website. So literally a 14-year-old child can go on a sugaring website, and there are several of them, indicate a name, it could be a fake name, indicate an email address, it could be one that they use regularly or not, and just say, with the click of a button, say they're 18. The websites make you say you're 18, but there's no vetting that goes on behind the scenes to actually confirm. This is not like you're going to a bank and signing up, for a loan, and they make you go through XYZ steps to ascertain your true identity and verify, who you are. So it's very easy to access these websites and to fall victim to them. Our investigations sort of unfolded in 4 different respects. One, we were identifying men on the websites who were actively seeking or not passing up on the opportunity to meet with a minor, and their intent to meet up with a minor was very clear. It was for sex. Secondly, we were recovering trafficking victims who were being advertised by a third-party trafficker on these websites. Third, we were identifying minors who went on these sites, again, because it's easy to access and sign up, and who were actually meeting with men. And these men, grown men, were raping them and commercially sexually abusing them. And then fourth, and this is sort of on the rise as well, we have seen young adults enter the sugaring construct, have those boundaries really blurred. This gives men a sense of entitlement when it comes to what sort of actions they think that they're entitled to if they pay money or gifts. And then it leads to sexual assault or rape. And those cases, unfortunately, are the most difficult for my office to prosecute, not because we don't believe the victim, but because of the sugaring construct, insofar as you're on there, you're clearly talking about sex, the men think there's an agreement or there's a level of entitlement. You show up, boundaries are blurred, and the men think they can proceed straightforward. And then, so the issue of consent and what true consent looks like in these kind of gray areas becomes really problematic and toxic. we have noticed with the cases involving minors, and we have several of them, that the kids learned about it in their peer circle, right? They learned about sugaring in their peer circle. It came from literally one of the friends saying, hey, you should check this out. This is an easy way to make money. You don't have to do much, or maybe you send a couple nudes, which are, pornographic images because of their age. The culture these days is oftentimes the kids will exchange these type of photos with each other. Well, if you're going to earn $100 or $1,000 to send it to some guy, why wouldn't you do that? And so, the victimization here is readily apparent with minors. I think everybody understands that. One of the also kind of problematic elements of the sugaring construct is that, again, oftentimes the offender doesn't necessarily know they're meeting with a minor, right? They're relying on this website and relying on the illusion of this website to somehow vet the quote unquote sugar baby. And so a minor might be showing up saying, hey, I'm 18, look at me. I signed up on the website, I must be 18. And the sugar daddy says, okay, great. And then they engage in this kind of transactional relationship that includes sex for something of value. Fortunately, in the state of Washington, we have a law on our books to address this. It's called commercial sex abuse of minor, where the sex buyer in this situation doesn't have to know that the victim is a minor. So they could rely on the victim's representations. But at the end of the day, they're going to be held criminally liable, even if this person they think is 18 is really 16 or 14 or 17, whatever the case may be. So that's something that's really helpful. Also helpful in that regard is it doesn't have to be a monetary transaction. You don't have to say this is $100 if you have sex with me tonight. It can be anything of value, which we frequently see in these sugaring relationships. A nice dinner, a trip to the mall, a vape pen, a new cell phone, a purse, whatever it is. If it holds any value, drugs, illegal drugs, marijuana, whatever it is, if it holds value and it's being exchanged for sex, that offender is criminally liable. I think Megan touched on this. One of the dangerous things about this construct is that language that normalizes this behavior and blurs the lines between criminal conduct and what they're considering to be innocuous. And I think that one of the messages that we need to address going forward, and I know Rob will talk about this later, is that would-be offenders need to understand that they're actually engaging in prostitution, if it's an adult, patronizing a prostitute because they're exchanging something of value or a fee, as the case would be, for sex. And if it's a minor, right? If it's a minor, the legal jeopardy dramatically increases, and it becomes a serious felony offense in the state of Washington and many parts of the United States. So I think folks need to understand that. When we look at sort of why people enter this, I think the marketing tells it all. And I will just put a trigger warning up for folks. The images that I think we're going to show real soon here are super toxic, and they're horrific to bottom line. I mean, these are literally the advertisements on some of these websites. And you can see that the females that are depicted here, if you go back, please, can be literally 16 years old, or they could be 22. That is entirely intentional. They could clearly choose or depict somebody who is 35 or 40 years old. They are marketing towards our young females. The other layer here that's incredibly toxic is the degree of power and control and violence that's inherent in this imagery. You literally have men grabbing hair, and some of the images suggest that the young woman here enjoys it or is okay with that. This is the dangerous imagery that's not only being portrayed to our young girls as somehow normal, but it's also being portrayed to our young boys, right? I mean, if they're thinking that this is what girls like and they're growing up in a porn culture, then this is the kind of attitude and disposition they're going to have when they're signed up on this website and they're expecting to meet somebody that night for a drink and then a date later at the hotel room. And this is incredibly toxic and problematic. The marketing also takes a turn. If you go to the sign up website page, and again, another ad, and someone asked where these ads coming from. These are all up and down the Atlantic coast. Fortunately, we have not seen some of these billboard ads that are depicted here in Seattle or the King County area. I think someone said they saw some in Vegas. The images online, though, the screen grabs are available anywhere. So we have kids seeing that right here in our backyard. There is an easy way for people to sign up. And one of the intentional things that the websites do is they will market towards people who have a college email address. So right here, we literally just went on the website seeking arrangements, said, I am a woman. I am interested in meeting men. I want to meet someone who has success and wealth. Those were the caveats. And, again, you type in your email address, which could be some fake email. You make up a birth date. You say, I'm not a robot. And voila, you're on the website. And also, if you have an edu email address, then you earn a free premium upgrade so that you have more accessibility and more viewership on the website. So they are clearly marketing towards young women who have edu email addresses, people who are in college. I will say that one of the victims in my case was 16. She was in one of those kind of pre-college programs at a local community college. So although she was a high school kid, she had a college email address and she was able to sign up that way. The difference in if you're signing up as a man to find a sugar mama or something like that, which I think is such a small percentage of what we're seeing here, and certainly doesn't represent any cases I've seen. You say you're a man, you're interested in meeting a woman, I want to meet someone who has looks and charm, and you'll notice that they're not marketing towards that young edu email address crowd. That's non-existent. So again, I think there's all these data points that we're seeing that to show confluence in the marketing techniques that we're seeing. One of the victims in my case also indicated that she had just read something on the Huffington Post about how sugaring can be empowering, it's easy, you can make a lot of money. And these websites are highly financially successful. They have huge PR machines. It is not hard for them to actively go out and find a guest writer to try to publish and do successfully publish articles on some of these mainstream media sites that our young people have access to. Again, it's normalizing and sanitizing something that at its core is incredibly toxic and harmful.
It sure is, Ben, and I tell you, you touched on the porn and sugaring and that intersectionality, and what it's telling our young boys is that this is what girls are supposed to do. And along with these websites, it's selling lies, and you've mentioned it more than once. It's normalizing it, it's sanitizing it, it's legitimizing it, and it's repackaged to be sweet sounding. But it's an exchange of money. It's an exchange of gifts, as you have mentioned. That is prostitution. And kudos to Washington State for what it is that we are doing. And I'm not sure of the other states that are aligned with what it is that we're doing, but I certainly hope there's more to follow. Rob, would love for you to share with us what you're doing and what you've been doing in this category of sugaring. You're muted, Rob.
Always happens at least once.
I know.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much, Megan, for giving us your shared experience. Really meaningful work, and thank you to StolenYouth and to Ben, both of whom have been instrumental in bringing this project to the fore. Ben especially, having gone through and kind of mentored us through this process to make sure that what we're going to do is kind of driving the most effectiveness based on the language we use. So I'm going to share my screen. Great. Can we see this? Great. So I'm going to set up with how this came to be. My name is Rob, and I do not have a history. I have a privilege of not having sex trafficking or any of this in the history of my life, right? My history is in advertising. However, my advertising agency, DNA, has done work for StolenYouth over the years. And One of the things that I do in my day-to-day responsibilities is what's called social data intelligence, which is taking the language used around big data from tens of thousands of different locations across the internet to kind of understand how people generally feel attitudinally, behaviorally about a brand or a product. And one of our financial services clients was starting to receive an increasing number of conversations around sugaring and sugar daddy. And when I say increasing numbers, I mean for every 100 posts they would get, 20 of them would be about sugaring. This is a huge prevalence in this kind of data set, which we usually see about like an ATM not working or something. But for the kind of conversation around sugaring to cut through was something I brought to Alan Brown, who's the CEO of the agency. And Alan Brown sits on the board of StolenYouth and just happened to get out of a meeting, not unlike this one, about the dangers of sugaring. We put two and two together and saw the kind of dangers that were happening in the own backyard of our own clients. And we knew that we had to do something about it. And it's interesting because our entire lives are set up to be helping people purchase things and help, like we are successful when people buy. And for this project, it is the opposite. We are successful when people stop buying. And the fact that we were able to get here and to be as have the kind of numbers that we do after just 8 months of working is pretty incredible. So we used a kind of deeper statistical analysis to get a better understanding of who was having the conversation, because our initial idea was to use kind of deep AI, natural language processing, to capture when anyone online in Washington state had conversations about sugaring, where they were saying sugar daddy, sugar mama. A lot of people say something that kind of sounds low stakes and almost kind of common, like, I wish I had a sugar daddy. And you don't know if it's a real thing or if it's a casual thing or if they're actually looking for information, right? But then you'd also have exploiters who are saying, like, I am looking for a sugar baby. And when we took a look at all of the conversation that was happening about sugaring in Washington state, we actually noticed that there is not just a single audience who's having the conversation, but it's multiple audiences. The general premise around Project Sugar Free is that this tool that lives on Twitter, which is the most public of the social media channels, it listens for conversation about sugaring. It looks at who's doing the talking, and then it automatically responds with a message that was developed by StolenYouth, Ben, and DNA to help educate, empower, and dissuade people from entering into sugaring relationships. And that works through an army of Twitter bots who automatically reply to the conversation. What we realized early on in our process is that when we capture that information from the data that we're getting, when someone tweets like, I could use a sugar daddy, for example, we use AI to kind of understand who's doing the talking so we can intercept with the right language. And if they are people who are trying to be exploitative, we report them to the Twitter services and try to get them removed from the platform. And one of the things we noticed, like I said, there are multiple audiences. It's not just exploiters who are there, who are self-defined sugar daddies and sugar mommies looking for victims through money, gifts, apps, et cetera, paying tuition, paying rent, paying books, that kind of thing. It's also the folks who are potential victims, those who are curious. If we take a look at this first bubble, every day at work, I always think about if the white old men I'm serving will ask me if they want to be my sugar daddy. Haven't found one yet. So something like that, we don't have a good understanding if that's a legitimate ask or if that's something that is meant to be in distasteful humor. But what we do is we use our kind of AI system to find a response based on the language used that is going to drive the most impact and try to get them to either think twice or actually answer some questions about the dangers of exploitative sugaring relationships. So the four audiences that we defined through our strategy: the potential victims who are curious, exploiters, those who are currently in sugaring relationships, that we tend to send more information and education, phone numbers, websites, people to contact to see if they want to try to get out. And then finally, and probably one of the largest groups, is the folks who are using sugar baby language and thinking they're doing so innocuously or as a joke or as something that they're throwing away nonchalantly, who are going a long way to normalizing the conversation of this kind of sanitized and glamorized prostitution in our culture that allows for people to find themselves in really, really vulnerable and dangerous situations, especially those from marginalized audiences and with underrepresented voices. So the goals of this piece of technology that lives on Twitter to respond to people as they're having the conversations in real time. So if someone were to mention something in Washington State, our technology is listening, and within several hours, it's responding. So there's kind of an immediacy to that conversation. The goals are to use facts and data to dissuade vulnerable populations from entering into those kind of relationships to begin with, which have proven to be dangerous, through education and empowerment. One of the things that Ben helped us with early on is not to use language that makes it sound like they've done something wrong, but use language that helps them understand that there's a way out, and help them understand that there's language to help educate, to be able to kind of understand who you are and how there's an off-ramp to this situation. Secondly, report and remove exploiters and potential criminals from the Twitter platform, which is a really important one, because when we see someone posting as a sugar daddy, they post frequently and they respond to people frequently. So our one of our main priority was the exploiters is removing them. So getting them flagged by the Twitter platform and just getting them off there. And you'll see that our progress has been pretty substantial in that regard. And finally, just the language of sugaring, like sugar baby, sugar mama, sugar daddy, as used in popular culture, music, and frankly on Twitter, which is a low stakes conversation platform with really high stakes consequences, and that normalization and that glamorization of prostitution, and act as a counterbalance for places like seeking arrangements. And as Ben mentioned, like the article in the Journal, where it kind of took sugaring as like an empowerment motion. So where we are today with this tool, this is kind of a look at the back end of the tool. What happens is when someone tweets about sugar dadding language, for example, my sis turned down a sugar daddy that was going to give her $400 a week, send him my way. Then we set up an automated response to it. And we have been shut down by Twitter before because bots are not allowed on their platform. So what we did was we tried to outsmart the algorithms. And instead of just one bot making the responses, it's now 50 bots making the responses. And they're all staggered at different times of the day. We're using algorithms to make sure that none of our bots are spamming conversations too quickly. It's kind of getting ahead of people who are exploiters. So as you see, we get these matched tweets. We flag whether or not they're people who are exploitative, or they are people who are curious using language, or victims. And then every time that we tag one, the AI sitting on the back of the machine gets smarter and understands what language is used for each of the 4 audiences. Now, this is kind of the slide I'm most proud of from this entire deck. We've identified 10,000 posts and responded to 3.5 thousand of them. Out of those 3.5 thousand replies posted, 1.3 thousand were removed. We've had 21 exploiters deplatformed from the Twitter platform out of 90, and we're working really hard on those other 70 just to get them removed. And one of the things that is not kind of explicitly stated in this fact sheet is that often we will see someone post something from a curious perspective saying, I wish I could find a sugar daddy for myself, or I wish I could find someone that I can be their sugar baby. And so when we look at those tweets and try to understand what context it was in, sometimes we'll see it on our platform. And then when we click into it to kind of get a better understanding of the context, it's deleted already. So in other words, someone who posted a curious conversation saw our response and decided better of it and deleted it from the platform. That's something that's impossible for us to track, but that is our biggest win. When we started this project, we thought to ourselves, if this can really just change one person's life in any kind of meaningful way, this will have been totally worth the effort. And I gotta say, the amount of kind of resonance from not only the community, but also Ben's department, StolenYouth, and kind of the greater kind of Washington state for the Better Good organizations has been incredible. And we are really excited to be kind of using technology kind of to dissuade the people who are turning to the path of least resistance to kind of set up these sugaring dates. So our next steps here, just this is something that I just wanted everyone to see, is that we had the idea, we have a build, it's live and out in the world. About half the posts that we're posting are automatically responded, but we still have some more kind of AI to put out into the world. So our next steps that we're already working on is with a collaboration with Twitter themselves and other kind of tech platforms. We're bringing in more engineers and getting more back-end managers to make this thing really robust. One of our underlying goals is to take this out of Washington state and to bring it kind of to more places across the country. One of the interesting challenges with that is we want to make sure, the reason that we chose we created 4 audiences, is so we would know that the message that they're getting is most impactful for who they are, right? So the interesting thing, though, is that when you go state to state to state, the legal ramifications and the attitudes and the messages that you would use are actually vastly different and kind of require some boots on the ground to really help. We need a Ben from other states to really help us kind of define those pieces. And so once we have that back end running, our plan is to definitely expand. So that's Project Sugar Free, and yeah, I'm really appreciative to be able to kind of take our understanding of human behavior and psychology and then take it from the buying and selling marketing world to this way more profound, impactful world. So I feel very fortunate that our company allows us to do this as well.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thanks for this incredible work that you and DNA are doing. This is incredible. And now we're going to open it up for some questions, and we've received some amazing questions in our chat. And I'm going to start with, what does a sugar daddy profile look like? And that's open for Rob, Megan, or Ben to speak to. And we do have a slide that we can also show. But this question has been asked more than once.
This is a real sugar daddy profile from the webpage that was identified in a criminal investigation. This gentleman offender showed up at a business thinking that he was going to meet a 16-year-old girl and pay her for sex. And I think there's a few things that are takeaways for me is, the annual income is clearly highlighted, and his success about opening companies and what he's looking for in terms of what he's seeking, and no strings attached, young, right? And then he goes on to describe some of the physical characteristics he's looking for. I think one of the real toxic problems with the sugaring construct is this idea of hypergamy, which is actually straight up advertised on the site. And I think it's trying to gaslight the audiences and thinking it's a good thing. But it's the idea or the concept of marrying up or sleeping with somebody, having a sex with somebody, in the case of children, being raped by somebody who is superior towards you for however society defines that, whether it's educational, your income, whatever sociological or economic kind of means you're looking at. And this is all marketed towards women or young girls thinking that hypergamy is acceptable and good. And it's very antithetical to, I think, what we're trying to teach our young kids, hopefully in terms of gender equality, that you don't need a man to succeed. It's also completely antithetical to the Me Too movement and how we've come as a community in recognizing that, hey, at work, we're not going to let the male supervisor or superior sexually harass or try to, sleep with the younger person who happens to be a female, so that the female has an ability to advance her position within the company. But so why would we allow that in the construct of sugaring, right? I mean, it's completely antithetical to where we're coming from as a community when dealing with these issues. And so my hope here is using the lived experiences and the technology work is really to change that language and to recognize the inherent gender inequality, the race inequality, and the income inequality that's grounded in the sugaring construct, and to call it for what it is. Like, let's not be gaslighted by these companies that are going to make a ton of money off of this at the expense of young people, primarily women of color, and the people that are doing the harm are privileged white dudes. So let's put an end to it, and let's not ever think that this is acceptable or socially normal.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for calling out the elephant in the room when it comes to race and socioeconomics. Rob, one of the other questions that we had that I think you might be able to help us with is Twitter responding positively to Project Sugar Free?
That's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, we were deplatformed early on because we were sending too much from the single account. So from an algorithmic, like totally cold, no human interaction perspective, like the concept of sugar-free is kind of always pushed away. Now, when we have tried to reach out, Twitter tends to not respond to things like this or anything that could kind of bring up like First Amendment rights, freedom of speech rights, until a critical mass is reached. So something like Project Sugar Free, we are always looking to kind of make inroads with higher ups at Twitter who would have the conversations with us. But we do find that those are very challenging just by the nature of like a lot of social channels don't kind of give access to the people who make decisions like that. And especially when there's such kind of political scrutiny. And we started launching this right at the end of last year, right around when the former president's Twitter account was disabled, and there was a lot going on and a lot of spotlighting on kind of what is and what is not allowable on Twitter. So no, I mean, I think the short answer is they're not terribly responsive to our outcries to try and not make it us who's doing this, but have them who are in charge of the tool kind of do it. Because that would be one of the best things that could happen out of Project Sugar Free, is for Project Sugar Free to no longer exist because it's now being taken care of by the platforms themselves. But that being said, we are in talks with some other platforms who are starting to give us more of a leg to stand on to kind of reach that critical mass. And I think one of the things that anyone who's on this call right now can do and can have conversations with the people they know is to kind of go to the Stolen Youth website, join up for the newsletter, make donations, and like frankly have more conversations about denormalizing the language, denormalizing this as a process. And I think the more the conversation happens, the more it's covered in mainstream media, the more Twitter has to respond, the more Instagram and Facebook have to respond. So it's sad to say that the onus is still on us, the little guys, to make. I believe you're on mute.
Thank you for that call to action, Rob. I really appreciate it. And we've got a couple of minutes here that we can have one more question that a number of folks have asked. Has seeking arrangements ever acknowledged the link to prostitution? Megan or Ben?
No, they adamantly deny it. And when we were on the prep for this call, I was sharing with everybody, I had just gone on the website this afternoon as I was finalizing my slides, and Seeking Arrangements now has a whole page about how they are dedicated to fighting human trafficking. they have a whole page about how they are dedicated to women's rights and feminism. And they have a whole page about how they are dedicated to ending poverty. And I had a couple of my staff members who were in a shared workspace, and I was literally yelling at them in frustration at the stuff that I was reading on this website, because it's just blatant denial of that's not what's happening here, and using different language to kind of code things or repackage it, or saying, I don't know, like we've seen the same thing with Backpage, right? So we're helping, and they're saying that with one hand, and perpetrating and facilitating with the other hand. And I think that these websites are no different.
Well, this hour has flown by, and this is a topic that we must continue to talk about. We must continue to raise awareness and to educate. And I thank everyone who not only joined the call today, I thank our panelists, and I would love to thank our sponsor, Caliber Home Loans, and our volunteer, Mark Sander. And most of all, I'm just honored and privileged to be a part of the Stolen Youth Board, and to the incredible staff at Stolen Youth. We thank you for your participation, and for the background motorcycle noise too. There will be more information on our website. This will be posted to YouTube for those of you who would like to share this out so that we can continue these conversations. Our children are at risk, and we must do everything that we can to support them. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks, everyone.